Jesus and justice. This is our theme for this year. I think I came up with it. So 4.5 years of Bible college. After that gets you. Deuteronomy chapter 31. Let's meet there. Deuteronomy 31. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read these few verses, Deuteronomy 31 to 30, or 31:30 to 32:4. And there's one specific line that I actually want to talk out of. Before we get going, it's about 9 o'clock right now. And generally on a Friday at 9 o'clock, I am on my couch thinking about all the ways I want to turn up and then end up like staying on my couch. And then falling asleep. So all that to say, if I'm going to be up preaching at 9 o'clock right now, the turn-up's about to have to be real. So I'm going to turn up. I'm gonna need y'all to join me in this. So there's a few ways this can happen. If there's something that resonates with you, there's a whole host of things you can do. There's a guy in our church, he'll yell at me, that's true. There was one time someone was preaching and it wasn't true, and the dude yelled from the back, that's not true. So you can yell that at me. You can yell right. You can yell yeah. There's a woman that sits on the front row. She says every now and then, you tell him. I'm like, I'm telling him, Jill. I'm telling him. We had a man last week. He just waved at me. Just waved at me from where. So I'm saying there's a whole host of stuff you can do. Just turn up with me. Sound good? Yeah. All right. Deuteronomy 31, starting at verse 30. I'll read with you all. Then Moses spoke the words of this song until they were finished in the ears of all the assembly of Israel. And Moses, he's about to sing this song. He says, give ear, O heavens, and I'll speak, and the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass, and like showers upon the herb. For I will proclaim the name or the reputation of the Lord and ascribe greatness to our God. And here's where I want to focus. The rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. I'll read that again. The rock, his work is perfect, for all of his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. This is where I want to focus this phrase. I pointed out again these three phrases. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. If you take notes, we'll title this time together, Watch the Throne. Watch the throne. In those three phrases that we just read, there's a bunch of foundational, fundamental truth shoved in there that shapes our perspective and our pursuit of justice. So what I want to do is I want to look at those three phrases. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. But I want to look at them backwards because I think it's a logical progression. Thank you. Yes, him, more of that. I can't see you because of these lights, but more of that. For all his ways are justice, his work is perfect, and he's the rock. Yeah. Sound good? So I want to start with all his ways are justice. Have you ever, can you take my phone? Yeah, bro. Catch it. Oh, gosh. I'm so sorry. It's an iPhone 10. Apple's going to shut me off in a few days anyways. So have you ever not known something that you should have known? Or have you known someone to not know something that you were convinced they should have known? So it's like a few years ago, and my wife and I are driving down the street, and she's saying, we should watch this movie called Bohemian Rhapsody about these people named Queen. And in that car ride, in that conversation, my wife learned that not only did I know who this woman named Queen was, I didn't know that this movie about this woman was based off of a true story, and I didn't know that she was for he's. In her mind, I didn't know something I should have known. Here's another example. I went to Albania after my freshman year of Bible college, and we There's a woman from Albania who invited us into her house to have dinner with her, and she's talking to us about what it was like for her growing up in Albania. And if you don't know, there was a time within the past 100 years where Albania, they had a pretty strict government. And so she's telling us about living under this strict government, and she ended up telling us that for the majority of her childhood and early adulthood, she'd never tasted a banana. She says, I didn't even know a banana existed. In my mind, she didn't know something that I was convinced she should have known. You know who else don't know something that they should know? You. You know who else? Me. You want to know who else? All of us, humanity. It's become clear to me over the past few years that we as people don't know something we should know. What is that? We don't know. Here's the theme of our conference. We don't know justice. Yeah. Yes. I caught wind of this in summer of 2020 when I sat in an office with some of the leaders from our church, and one of the other leaders in our church said, are we even supposed to do anything in terms of justice? I caught wind of this summer 2020 when there are people who look like me and come from where I come from are in the streets 50 years after Dr. King died and are still saying, we want justice. I realized I caught wind of this when you got one room of the house of God over here and another room of the house of God over there, and both are shouting at each other, condemning each other to hell over what their view of justice is. I caught wind of it when me, just like some of you, looked around and you realized whatever's going on here, it's not right. Yeah. And with whatever little faith you can muster up, tied into agony and despair, your soul whispers, God, how long? You someone who don't know justice? If you're someone, you might have found yourself like me, confused, kind of hopeless, tired. I think angry, maybe sad. I'm feeling a lot. If that's you, I want to slide in your DMs real quick. Give you some good news. Give you some good news from the mouth of Moses. Moses says, if you don't know justice, look no further, because all of God's ways are justice. Yes. Tim Keller, he quotes a word study on the Hebrew and Greek word that means justice, and he summarizes. I think it's a slide. Tim Keller, this is a great summary. He says, justice means to treat people equitably and give them what they're due. Justice means giving people what they're due. Justice means giving all people what they're due. Justice means giving people what's their right. It means giving all people what's rightfully theirs. Tim Keller says, or Moses says, all of God's ways are justice. The way he lives his life is justice. His conduct is justice. His vibe is justice. Moses says, I took a step back. I watched how God spoke, how God thought, how God worked. And the one word that I had to characterize it was justice. All of God's ways are justice. So I preached this for the Bible college that I graduated from last month. And I'm studying this, and I thought, Moses, that sounds good. God's lifestyle is justice, but how can I actually prove that? Like, I have yet to see the verse that lists out all of the ways that God meets our standard and demands for justice. So Money Mo, help me figure out how can I prove this to people? And then as I'm asking this question to Moses, Jackie Hill Perry walks into the room and she says, bro, that's your problem. She pointed out my real problem and she said this. She says, you've been tricked into thinking that your human feelings and thoughts hold weight in the moral universe. Ow. As if God isn't the ultimate authority on what's good. There's no moral authority higher than God. God himself is the standard by which all right and wrong is determined, which is to say that whatever is good morally is whatever is like God. And I was like, Jackie, stop. She stopped. Then this dude named Arthur Pink came into the conversation. And he said, God is a law or a standard unto himself. Whatever God does is right. So it's like, Jackie, Arthur, make it make sense. And they said, Jaron, you're trying to figure out if God meets the standard of justice as if there is some standard outside and above him. Yeah. God doesn't meet a standard. God is the standard. Yeah. What God does is the standard of justice. He defines justice. He is justice. Listen to me. I think that this group, this age group of Christians, just in general, God has blessed us, common grace, with an innate desire for justice. And I think as we continually build the church that we're a part of is going to make strides in justice like she's never before. But here's the caution. If you're not careful, your definition of justice will be defined by human reason more than it's defined by God's revelation. You see what I'm saying? You'll look for a standard and a picture of justice, and you'll end up looking at a picture that's painted by a person and not the picture that's being displayed by God. If you're not careful, your picture of justice will be painted by Twitter, by Facebook, by CNN, by Fox, by the homeboy down the street, by your feelings, by society. And what happens when we get these pictures painted by some hand not named God is we take this picture and we put it up next to God. And here's the question, do you fit? And here's what happens. One, either we try to impose that on God and make him fit, and we end up shape-shifting God. So we end up following a golden cow, a GOP Jesus, a liberal Lord, saying I'm a disciple of Jesus when we're just following liberalism and conservatism baptized. Look, I've been pastoring our church for all of like 6 months now. But I can tell you, I've talked to some people who are following a baptized political position and not Jesus. Or maybe you don't do that. Maybe you'll take that picture, put it up next to God, and realize he doesn't fit and just walk away. Oh, I've talked to plenty of people who aren't Christians anymore because God didn't fit the picture that they came up with. When you get a picture that's painted not by God, that will inevitably lead to you following a fake God or walking away from the real God. No, if you want a picture for justice, look at God. God, he's justice lived out. He's justice in 3D and HD. He's the description of justice in a language that you can understand. If you want to know justice, here's my application in the introduction. If you want to know justice, know God. Or know God to know justice. Well, what's justice look like? Well, what's God doing? What's justice look like? What's God saying? What's justice look like? What's God's perspective? God, how do I carry out justice for the poor and marginalized in my society? Well, what's he doing? God, how do we seek justice in the racial tensions in these yet to be united states? Well, what's he doing? No God, no justice. Let me nuance it a little. No God, know the way to justice. Listen to me, friends. God, the way God carries himself isn't on the right side of the line or the left side of the line. The way God carries himself is above and outside. It transcends these lines. Yes. God, he's not like hopscotching between progressive and conservative in how he addresses certain issues. There's a guy I read who said, God addresses issues, but in his own way. Yeah. You know what that means for us? Centrism is not a Christian virtue. The middle ground is not holy ground. Balance is not what we're called to. You know what God didn't say? Be balanced as I am balanced. Right. Come on. Yeah. It's true. You know what he did say? Be holy, be other. Be transcendent, above and beyond as I am. That doesn't just mean in your personal piety, that also means in how you pursue justice. If you want to know what justice is and how to pursue that justice, then know God. Look at God. So this is what I want to do. I want to rephrase that. That's where the sermon came from, this title. Instead of know God to know justice, I just want to say, watch the throne. Watch the king on his throne. Psalm 9 says that God, he's established his throne for justice. Psalm 89 says his throne is founded upon righteousness and justice. The Psalms specifically paint a picture of God as a king who sits on a throne, and he's founded it upon righteousness and justice. Travel back with me to like 2009, 8, 7, high school, junior high, Jaron, halls of Eisenhower High School in Oklahoma. My favorite time of the day was fifth period, right after lunch. Me and my boys, we would eat lunch real quick, and then we'd run through the halls, and we're asking people, hey, give me 25 cents. Hey, give me 50 cents. Hey, give me $1. Hey, girlfriend for today, look, give me a few dollars. Asking everybody, just trying to get as much money as we could, and once we got as much money as we could, we run straight to them vending machines, and we get all the good foods. Mike and Ike's, Now and Laters, Funyuns, Doritos, Red Bull, because that's when we could have Red Bull then in school. Mountain Dew, gum, Skittles, M&M. Listen, and then we take that and we'd go to fifth hour and have a feast. You ain't lived until you had a fifth hour after lunch feast. In Miss Wiccan's class, while she's teaching Pythagorean's theorem and geometry, and you smell like you marinated in Axe, you ain't lived, fam. You ain't lived. So here we find this day, and we get our money, and we got like $7 this day. And so we was like, this fifth hour feast about to hit different, G. And so we get our money, we go to the vending machines, and behold, the Mike and Ike's have turned into Nutrigram bars.
It's not good.
Funyuns have turned into baked Lays.
That's good.
God bless, God bless. You're gonna be the object of our ministry time later. Friends, the Dr. Pepper's water. We're gonna have an altar call after. Like, gosh, we need. So we sit here and look at this site, and we're like, "What thou meanest this?" And so, like we should have done, we skipped fifth hour and we went to investigate what happened to our vending machines. And it turns out that an unnamed sitting president and his unnamed wife had a platform. A part of their political platform was to make children healthier. And they acted and accomplished that platform by turning our vending machines into portable Whole Foods. When the Psalms paint a picture of God as a king on a throne, that's founded upon righteousness and justice, they're saying that justice is God's platform. It's his priority. And his whole rule is an act to work out that priority of justice. Watch the throne. Yeah. You know what that tells me? If justice is the priority of the king on the throne, justice ought to be the priority of the citizens of the kingdom. Yes. Justice isn't a flavor of Christianity. Justice isn't an add-on. Justice isn't quote unquote woke or progressive or millennial or Gen Z. Justice isn't an option. No. If justice is the king's priority, justice is the king's people's priority. So I know some of y'all are plant parents. How many of y'all are plant parents in this room? Plant parents, you have parents that are plants in your house that you're like, yeah, plant parents, yeah, you know. Plant parents, you're raising children. So for the three of you plant parents that actually kept your plants alive, how many of you like to start from scratch, like actually plant the seeds and then watch them grow? Because you plant a certain seed, you expect a certain fruit. So God in Isaiah chapter 5, he tells this story of this plant daddy. You can fact check me, it's in Isaiah chapter 5. In Isaiah chapter 5, he says this plant daddy, he got this real good garden, real nice, the best kind of soil. And he planted some seeds and he planted it to get sweet grapes, the good kind of sweet grapes that like crunch in your mouth real good and the good kind. So he did it, he planted that seed, he did everything, and he said he sat back and watched for a second. Isaiah 5, you can fact check me. It's in there, I promise. It's different though, I'm paraphrasing. The word plant daddy ain't in the Bible. Just in case you were wondering. And so he says he looked at it, he waited, and he went back, and some grapes came out, and he pulled a grape. He put that thing in his mouth, expecting the sweetest grape, and then his eye twitched a little. And he said it was a sour grape. And then he finishes off this story by saying that the plant daddy was displeased because he expected sweet grapes, because he planted that whole vineyard for sweet grapes, but what he got out of it was sour grapes. Then right after, he goes meta on it, and he says, actually, I'm the divine plant daddy. My people are the people that I've planted. I planted them expecting justice. And what I see is that they're allowing injustice, and they're also perpetuating injustice. God's displeased with his people when they didn't produce justice. Then a little bit later in Isaiah came back and said, God doesn't want you coming to him with worship songs. He says, when you come to him having sought justice. Amos comes back and says the same thing. He says, I don't want your sacrifices. I don't want your offering. I want you to let justice roll down like waters. Micah comes back and he speaks for God, and God says, what is it that I've required of you other than what's the very first thing? Do justice. Then God comes in flesh. He's talking to some religious leaders, and he says, look, y'all have done the tithes. Y'all have done the religious stuff, but you've neglected the weightier. This is word for word, the weightier, the most important, the significant, the heavier part of the law, justice. God's expecting justice out of his people. Watch the throne and see a king who prioritizes justice. So when you watch the throne, what does this justice look like? What's that actually look like? Because I love you and because I need to fill up my time, I answer that question for you. You watch the throne, and there are two ways that you'll see the throne carry out justice. The first way, you can write this down, watch the throne and you'll see that justice is restorative. Watch the throne and you'll see that justice is restorative. There's a scripture in the Psalm, I'm forgetting the exact reference, where it says, God executes justice for the needy. Another scripture says that he seeks justice for the oppressed. The phrases like that find themselves continually throughout the Psalms. They're all communicating that God seeks justice for those without. Yeah. Tim Keller, he says, an aspect of justice is not just paying somebody back for what they've done. An aspect of justice is making sure that people, humans, the marginalized, the vulnerable, get the care that they're due. My grandfather, before he passed, he'd always snoop around my stuff, analyze everything I had. He'd walk in my room and look in my closet to see what clothes were there, what clothes weren't there. He'd walk into the refrigerator, see what food was there, what wasn't there. When it was a sports season, he'd walk around my room and see what equipment was there and wasn't there. And then it used to freak me out. And then I started to notice whenever he'd do that and analyze my whole life, he'd leave for about 30 minutes and he'd come back with the food I needed, the equipment I needed, the clothes I needed. He made sure that I never went without. That's what retributive justice is. It's God making sure that the vulnerable, those who are marginalized and vulnerable and at risk of being mistreated and are being mistreated, he makes sure that they don't go without. You don't believe me? Read the Mosaic Law. Look at how many of God's laws, his righteous standards, his righteous requirements are geared towards making sure that the widows and the orphans and the immigrants and the poor have care. For example, he instituted this whole farming law where he was like, when y'all are farming and when y'all are, what's the thing where you like get the food after you've planted it? That. When you can tell I don't do this. When you're harvesting and if you leave some back, God says, when you realize that you left some, don't go back and get it. He says, no, you leave that for the widow. Leave that for the poor. Leave that for the immigrant. He's making sure that they don't go without. So listen, I know some of you sit back and you see injustice in the world and you feel as if you're the only one who cares because your friends aren't talking about it. Your church isn't talking about it as much as you'd like. You don't see it talked about on social media as much as you like. Listen, God sees what you see. God sees what you don't see. God sees what you never could see. And he cares. And he doesn't care with the passive heart. He cares with the heart more holy than yours. And not only does he care, he makes sure in ways you don't see and never will see that these people have what they deserve. God's not waiting until the by and by to make sure that the poor and the orphan and the widow and the marginalized get taken care of. No, God says, I'm taking care of them in the here and now. Listen, friends, if your view of justice is just a retributive, reactionary, paying somebody back for the crime they've done, that's a fragmented view of justice. God's view of justice is, I'm seeking these people out. Yeah. You know what that also tells me? I'll talk to you in student language. This kind of restorative justice, it's not extracurricular. It's required coursework in the class of Jesus' discipleship. Caring for the poor isn't extracurricular. Caring for the immigrant isn't extracurricular. Caring for the orphan, caring for the kid in foster care, these things aren't extracurricular for a certain kind of Christian. No, these things are required for all Christians. And I'm not saying you got to go do everything, but if you're following Jesus, friends, I can guarantee you, if you're listening to the call of Jesus, you'll find yourself doing something. Because this is just who he is. Here's the next one. Watch the throne and see that justice is retributive. This is the one where Paul in Acts 17, he says, God's appointed a day where all will come before him and give account, and where Jesus says there's going to be a day where I'll judge the nations. This is God giving people the punishment that their actions has earned. Like, I've watched Judge Judy, and I've seen that woman give some pretty shady verdicts based on if she liked the person or if she didn't. I've read history books. I've seen all white juries not convict a man or not even hold a trial because of how he looked. I've seen all black juries in the 90s not hold trials because of how a person looked. I've seen a lot of judges and juries make decisions based off of their own biases and how someone looked. Didn't even consider what they did. God's justice being retributive means he's not swayed by a cute face. God shows no favoritism. No, God says, I don't care what you look like. I see what you did. And I'm paying you back for what you did. This is good news to me. This is good news to you. Because you look around the world and it looks like evil's running amok, don't it? It looks like there's injustice having its way, just dancing in the streets, as if it's going to go unchecked. Yeah. And you find yourself asking, why? Like, what is this? God wants you to know there's going to be a win. Yeah. There's going to be a day when I call them forward and they got to give an account. Yeah. Let me talk to your heart, because you ask why that thing happened to you and nothing happened to them. Who did it to you? You wonder if anyone actually knows or cares about that thing that happened to you. You're still wondering if someone forgot, as if you'll die in the grave with it. God says, no, friend, I've got it in my case files. And there's going to be a day where I stand on the judge's seat, and they're going to have to come stand before me. Vengeance is mine, and I'll pay them back for what they did to you. So you watch the throne and you'll see that justice is restorative and retributive. You want to see what happens? You want to see the result, what God brings about? That's the next two phrases, and I'm sitting down after this. It says that God, all of God's ways are justice. Everything he does is justice. Because of that, his work is perfect. His work is perfect. His work, that's the product of his actions. The things that he produces is perfect, because all that God does is justice. What he produces is perfection. You ever play Guitar Hero and actually got a perfect game? You hit every note. And that perfect game means you hit every note. There wasn't a note missing. What Moses is saying is that at the end of this game called life, God will have hit every note, There's no justice missing. There's no good thing missing. The product of all of God's ways being justice is complete perfection, perfect peace. This is the biblical concept of shalom, arene. It shows up in your Bible as peace. That picture is God saying, I'm producing something where everything will be perfect. There will be no good thing missing. He says, I see the injustice in the world, and I'm working to make it perfect. I see what happened to you, and I'm working to make it perfect. I see what's going on in the streets, and I'm working to make it perfect. I see those people on the corners of your streets, and I'm working to make it perfect. When he's done working, it'll be perfect. And if it ain't perfect, friends, let me encourage you, he ain't done working. Yeah. But there's going to be a day where he's done, and it's going to be perfect. And then Moses says he's a rock. He's a rock. He's a rock. Outside of my city, Joplin, there's this spot called Shoal Creek. And in the middle of Shoal Creek, there's this big old rock just in the middle of the thing. And I've walked that trail around that part of Shoal Creek a lot. And I've walked it in the summer. I've walked it in the winter. I've walked it in the spring. I've walked it during storms. I've walked it during sunny days. And regardless of the times changing and the season changing, you know what that rock does?
It stays there.
Sit right there being a rock. Doing what the rock does. Moses says God's a rock. This God who only works justice is a rock. That means regardless of the changing seasons, regardless of the changing times, regardless of the changing circumstances, what he's doing what he does. Working justice. He's working justice in this season and that season. He's working justice in this pain and that pain. He's working justice in this country and that country. Friends, he's always working out justice. Even when you don't see it, he's working. Even when you don't feel it, he's working. He never stops. He don't never stop working justice. All he's doing is working justice. And when he finishes, it'll be complete. That's the result of his work of justice. But God's about that action. I'm really sitting down after this. I'm not being a preacher with 8 conclusions. I'm really sitting down after this because he already started this process. You know how he started this process? Let me tell you this story I heard right quick. It's a preacher story, so it's probably fake. But I'm going to take it as true. There's this cat, this dad of like a young boy, and it's a Saturday, and he works this hard job 5 days a week. So it's a Saturday, and his one mission on this Saturday is to sit in his chair, his special chair that don't nobody else sit in. Some of your dads have one of those. Sits in that special chair in front of that TV, and he's going to watch football. So he sits down in front of that TV, starts watching football, having the time of his life in his chair, enjoying his chair. And from a distance, he hears, "Daddy! Daddy! I'm stuck!" So like any good, compassionate father, he immediately, with his heart for the one who's lost out of the 95, just leans up a little bit and says, "Huh?" Here's, "Daddy, I'm stuck." So now this father who just wanted to enjoy his chair has a dilemma. There's a problem he has to fix. His son is outside in the playground that's broken on him and he's stuck. And so now he's thinking, okay, I got to get my boy out. So he says, you know what I'll do? I'll encourage him out. So he says, "You can do it. You've got my genes in you. You can do it." And it gets quiet, so he sits back and starts watching football. About 2 minutes later, "Daddy, I'm stuck." So he's like, okay, encourage him, it didn't work out, so maybe I'll instruct him out. So he says, just slide to the left, slide to the right. Wobble, baby, wobble, baby, wobble. Then he sits back. "Daddy, I'm stuck." So encouraging didn't work, instructing didn't work. So then he says, okay, I'm just going to have to scold this boy. So then he laughs at it and says, "How are you getting that thing anyways? That's not my genes. That's your mama genes. I knew you wasn't athletic because she's your mama." He sits back angry. "Daddy!" So then he thinks, okay, encourage him, it didn't work. Instructing him, didn't work. Scold him, it didn't work. So this daddy who was in his chair, he stood up. He walked outside, saw his son in this mess of a jungle gym. And after standing up, he stepped in to that mess. He stepped into that mess and he started to put that jungle gym back together, and he unstuck his son. This daddy fixed that problem by standing up and stepping in. Let me talk to a Christian who wonders and asks and thinks there's no hope for the injustice in the world. Let me talk to a Christian that wonders if God cares about what you see. Let me talk to a Christian who's concerned that injustice will continue and there's no check on it. Listen to me, God already fixed the problem when 2,000 years ago he stood up and he stepped in. He promised to this man named Abraham, and he said, I've chosen your family to perpetuate justice in the earth. He promised to Abraham's family a little bit later and said, one of your descendants is going to be a king who will bring justice into the earth. He came back and said that king will actually be a servant who perpetuates justice in the earth. Then God stood up from his throne, stepped into this world through the womb of a woman without the help of any man, took on the name Jesus, said, I'll be my own seed of Abraham, said, I'll be my own king from Abraham's line, said, I'll be my own servant who brings justice. He stood up, Jesus stepped in, and he brought justice. He brought restorative justice when he took the marginalized in society and made them first-class citizens in the kingdom of heaven. He brought restorative justice when he took the outcast and he made them members of God's family. He brought restorative justice when he saw us who were vulnerable and oppressed by sin and death, and he hung himself up on a cross to dismantle the powers of sin and death. He brought restorative justice when through his body he led the way in the abolition of the West African slave trade. He brought restorative justice when through his body he established hospitals in the Western Hemisphere. He stepped in and brought justice. He didn't just bring that kind, he brought retributive justice. He brought retributive justice when he looked at you, when he looked at me, when he looked at we who were guilty of sin and deserved death. And he hung himself on that cross and he said, I'll die the death that's deserved for justice. And friends, let me tell you, he's gonna come back and he's gonna finish retributive justice when he finally enacts the ultimate death penalty on death. When he finally enacts the ultimate death penalty on Satan. When he finally enacts the ultimate death penalty on sin and evil and all causes of it. He watched the throne and see how our God stood up, stepped in, and started working out justice. Watch the throne and see Jesus do it. And he says, I want you to follow me in it. What's justice? Justice is following our Jesus who stood up and stepped in. Can I pray for us?